Bob, welcome to the Tales of Leadership podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Josh. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah. Talking about it before, but it's always a honor to have people on the show that continue to serve, and that's why I'm really excited to like dig into your leadership journey because you've served both in a capacity in the military arms, but you also were a coach, a teacher, and then now working in a nonprofit organization. So you continue to serve, and I always find it for me selfishly the best conversations to learn from people like you who have led on both sides, not just wearing the uniform, but outside of the uniform. So I'm really excited to dig into what makes Bob tick.
Huh. That's a great question. Many years of experience. I always say trial and error, failure, picking yourself back up, learning from some great mentors. It's 56 years in the making.
Yeah, that's going to be the challenge in about an hour. How can we distill all of that down into an episode? But I will do my best. And I always love it starting off with just the same question that we have everyone on the show with is how would you define leadership in your terms?
I think for me, leadership is one, serving your people. If you take care of those that you're leading, they will always take care of you. It's selfless leadership in that way. It's always about you know taking the blame for anything that goes wrong, but passing
Yeah.
on the credit for everything that goes right. um, Knowing your people and caring, truly caring about them. When I say knowing them, it's not just, hey, what's your name? It's knowing their situation, knowing where they're coming from, knowing what their goals are and how you can help them achieve that and make them a better person. you know Far too often we do a lot of talking, we don't do as much listening. And
Mm,
I've kind of adopted in my life, something I work really hard on is listen to learn and understand, not to respond. And I think when you do that, it really forces you to sit back and listen more intently. And it's a great piece in terms of building those relationships. And leadership is all about relationships. Whether you're leading up, you're leading down, or you're leading your peers. It's all about relationship building, building that trust and that integrity that this is what we're doing, and you're on the same path together, having a clear vision.
that was already fire in terms of me already trying to scribble down notes because I use this podcast in a way for me too to become a better leader. And I have already taken half a page of notes from just your definition alone, which I love. And I think one of the things that quote, I've never heard that before, but listen to learn and understand, not to respond. I wish someone would have told me that when I was just starting out in combat arms because I was a javelin. I'd fire, forget, and I would just act because I thought that that's what leadership meant is that you had to be decisive and you had to go take action. And if you weren't doing that, then you weren't leading from the front. So that's phenomenal advice, and this would probably be a great place just to start easing into it. How did you begin to develop that type of mindset?
Yeah, well, as a young Marine,
Yep.
I was a corporal filling a gunnery sergeant's billet. So I worked with a lot of senior enlisted members, but I was leading a logistics shop, and I used to get really high strung when things would
Yeah.
happen. And it was, hey,
Yep.
I got to make this happen in this way because otherwise they're not going to look at me the same. They're going to run over me. Um, and I had a major that I worked for, who, he just kind of, when I'd come into him like, sir, we need to relax. What's the situation?
Yeah.
He'd I'd give him the situation. He'd digest it. Okay. He'd make a phone call. Problem solved. And
Yep.
I think that taught me, like, you don't have to go off, absorb all the information, absorb the situation. It's not a crisis. This isn't something that's going to be life or death today or tomorrow. Like, what do we need to do to solve this? What steps do we need to take? And that really became, for me, I think, the best learning experience in
Mm.
that whole process of listen, get the information, understand the information, and then take the steps to remedy it.
Yeah, there's I think in the Marine Corps they developed the OODA loop. I'm not even going to try to say it off the top now. But it's similar to that process. And in the military or in the army, we call it a SEALs halt. And then I kind of redefined it as stop. So stop, take a tactical pause, observe your surroundings, and pursue with purpose. And sometimes when I find my heart starting to flutter and like that gut feeling of like, hey, Josh, you got to go. I sometimes take a tactical pause and just realize, all right, let the environment shape until it is truly time to decide. So that was great advice, and I'm sure early on in your career that was a blessing too as you continue to advance through your journey. But I would love to start too of what was your story to serve? Everyone has a story, and the Marine Corps is usually one of those branches that you either want to test yourself, or it comes from like a family background. So I'm curious, like, what drove you to join the Marine Corps and serve?
Yeah, I have a couple of both of those actually. I had a cousin who was two-time Vietnam tour. Uh, he just retired as a colonel not that long
Mm,
ago. Um, just a huge inspiration to me as a kid, and was probably one of the most influential people that I had in my life. Even though I didn't see him that often, but when I did, there
mm,
was always that respect. Um, and it kind of drove me in that direction. But it was also, coming out of a divorce situation and not really having a lot of guidance.
yeah,
I really wanted to challenge myself, and I figured that the best way to do that was looking into the military, and then I applied for an NROTC scholarship. Um, I didn't get that. I did meet the person 20 plus years later. We shared a cubicle in the history division in Quantico, who scored 20 points higher on the SATs than I did. He went to Villanova. I went to Paris Island. But, it was that challenge of, and that giving back, that service aspect. I had the opportunity to do some community service as a youngster through my mom and through high school and National Honor Society, where we gave back, whether it was a Special Olympics or doing community projects. And I just wanted to take it to the next level. And I felt that serving our country, doesn't get any better than that. And if I was going to do it, I wanted to challenge myself, and hence the Marine Corps.
yeah. I will tell you, I'm sure the Marine Corps got the better deal of the bet being a non-commissioned officer through your pipeline versus being an officer. And I struggled with that when I was just starting off too, because I grew up in rural West Virginia. There's not that many opportunities, and I'm not joking when I say it's the coal mines, or you get lucky and go to college, or you get a scholarship. And I was almost on the fence of joining the Marine Corps. I did the delayed entry program because I wanted to go test myself. And then my buddy taught me, he's like, hey, you could go be a cadet at a college and commission and still do everything you wanted to do. I wanted to jump out of planes and go to ranger school and do all those crazy stuff that a young man wants to do. And for whatever reason, I remember my military recruiter at the time, and this is, 2005. So Iraq is, pretty hot and heavy, and Afghanistan is just starting to formulate. They actually let me go, which I think nowadays they would have probably been like crucified if they let someone go who goes through MEPS already. But everything worked out, and it's been a blessing to be an officer from that perspective. But I guarantee you, the Marine Corps has probably had a phenomenal non-commissioned officer, and you probably touched more lives because what I've learned as I grow in rank, I lose that connection with soldiers, and as non-commissioned officers grow through rank, they tend to continue to have those touch points until you make the rank of a sergeant major, and then you got to get stuck in the cubicle with another officer.
That was one of the reasons I love being a master gunny, because, obviously still an E9, but you have a lot more touch points out in the field with the troops. So, there's those three ranks. Hitting sergeant was kind of that first one, because now
Yeah,
you really get that opportunity to lead. Gunny, you start to get you know the ability to lead up and down, but you still have a lot of touch point with the troops. As a master guns, now I get to go and be a mentor,
yeah,
both to those other staff NCOs and the young NCOs. So, you know but having that touch point, wow, what an honor that was, and being able to help mold and develop so many young Marines, and they help mold me too. I mean, that's again, it's you learn from those above you and you learn from those below you as well. And I think that they taught me just as much as I taught them.
It would be something that I've always admired about the Marine Corps is just when you go through once a Marine, always a Marine, right? Like everyone's heard that slogan. But what did it mean to you, like when you were going through there and you were challenging yourself? And I don't know your background, but once you finally made it, when you were a Marine and you shipped off to your first duty location, what were some of the feelings that you had?
Well, one, I use this all the time now when I'm talking to, especially in veterans groups or anybody that's struggling. Um,
Yeah,
when you complete basic training, officer candidate school, just not just in the Marine Corps, in any branch of the service, it makes you a one percenter.
mm,
What do I mean by one percenter? Less than 1% of the population is willing to step forward and serve. And to equate that, less than 1% of the population will complete a marathon. Less than
yeah,
1% of the population becomes a Division I athlete. Less than 1% of the population obtains their doctorate. So when you completed basic training, you've already put yourself into an elite category of achievers in the United States.
mm,
And I think sometimes, you know, we forget that because yeah, we did it. Okay, great. We moved on. Now we've done our career. We've done our 4 years, whatever it is, time that you served. We sometimes forget the fact that we are already an elite company by what we've achieved in our life, and that's where
yeah.
we start from. That's where we should be starting from, not anywhere else. Start from the fact that you are already an elite achiever, and if you've achieved that, you can achieve anything else that you put your mindset to. But I think the confidence that you come out of it with, there's that balance between cockiness and confidence. I just like to
Yeah.
say we're very confident in our abilities, and they that's part of it. It builds you up into that. Um, you're taking on now responsibility. Heck, I turned 18 in boot camp, so when I got out to
Oh,
my
wow.
first duty station, young 18-year-old, wow, you're put in charge of different things that most people would never do until they're 35, 40.
Yeah.
So you have the opportunity to learn and grow. Again, I attribute a lot of my success to the folks that I worked with when I first came in the Marine Corps because they mentored me. They gave me opportunity to learn and grow. Not that I didn't make mistakes, but they didn't
Yeah.
crucify me for my mistakes. They let me
Mm.
learn from those mistakes. Now, if I made those same repeat mistakes over and over again, I'm sure I would have been crucified. But having the opportunity to make those mistakes and grow from them, and continually being challenged by giving more opportunities every time you accomplish one. Hey, okay, well, you can do that. Let's see what else you can do. Constantly challenging you to improve, not just professionally, but also personally, and develop your leadership and your own drive as a human being.
I think that was a challenge that I had too, like working through the ranks of um, iteratively developing, like the same concept through engineering of how we iteratively develop something into a production level and then continuing. But for my own personal development, like I had all the schoolhouse stuff. I went through Ranger School. I did all those things. I had all the tabs when I showed up to my unit. But there's a difference of actually implementing leadership and trying to influence others to do things, especially when it's like extremely uncomfortable. And I know that you deployed to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, part of that, and I deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, but like there was something different for me of like taking over my platoon in Afghanistan after going through a schoolhouse and then like, all right, well, this is it. Like it's, and I always fall back to like deeds, not words. Is that how can I model the behaviors that I want out of my men, and then how can I influence them from your perspective, like from the Marine Corps, and then going through as a non-commissioned officer and your experience in Desert Storm, what was that like going from a garrison environment as a leader to, hey, we're in the show now?
Yeah, I think I was actually I got promoted to sergeant while we were deployed on the Westpac,
Mm,
when things broke out, and we're supposed to be heading to Australia. Instead, made the hard turn right. Um, got stuck out on a ship for 102 straight days, most of it in general quarters,
no.
um, doing circle squares, dropping anchor. He said, I had the sauna. When you call it an office space, I wouldn't really call it an office. It was like a closet, but the diesel exhaust vent came up through our
Oh
little
god.
cubby. So we had our own personal sauna every time they kicked into diesel generators. But I think it's just like anything else in leadership. How do you demonstrate, what should be done, you know, by any other way, but doing it yourself too. Like I
Yeah.
would never ask anybody that's in my charge to do something that I'm not willing to do. And quite frankly, it's not just about willing to do. You know, Hello, sandbags need filled. I'm out there filling sandbags with them. I'm not just sitting back. Well,
Yep.
I'm the sergeant, so you go do it. To me, they're going to be much more willing to do it if you are there with them, and not that you're above that. Now, are there times where yes, where you as a leader are called to other duties, and you have responsibilities to the people that are in charge of you, and therefore, hey, I'm tasking you. Put that young corporal in charge. All right, you're tasked with getting this done. But I think if they see you and your willingness to do what you're asking them to do, they are definitely going to be more likely to follow you. And that doesn't come just overnight either. That comes
Yeah.
from what you exhibit and that trust and that um, you know belief in your integrity and you as a leader. And again, that goes back to that relationship building. Did you develop that bond with them along the way that
Yeah.
hey, they're going to follow you? And it's certainly different when you're going from, all right, well, we break at 11:30, go to chow, go to the gym, come back to work,
Yeah.
and 4:30 we're going to the beach. To now we're in a situation where you're, you know, definitely a different scenario in the first Gulf War compared to Afghanistan and Iraq. But now we're going to be navigating the floating minefields in the Gulf. All right, we need people up on the flight deck, MVGs, looking out for mines. It's a scary time of the scary of the unknown and what you might wind up encountering. So showing them the confidence and being that leader that they can follow and get behind, I think is a big part of it.
Yeah. I 100% agree with that. Is that I think one thing that I stood out from my peers as I like continued to move up through the ranks is that I remember this like old commercial or a newspaper clipping actually, and it had like this leader, and it's been overused. You'll find it on LinkedIn everywhere versus a manager. And then it's someone trying to move a ball or a big stone up a hill. The leader's actively helping the team move it where the manager's sitting on top and he's directing the team to do that. And I think like you just said it beautifully, and that's the art of science of leadership is that sometimes we have to direct because we have to operate with mission command because there's just so much to do and you can't do everything. So what can you delegate that other people can do just as well as you so you can focus on the higher level tasks at hand? And then when do you need to get your hands dirty with the team to show them like, hey, I'm not above doing this work. I'm not special. I have a rank title, but that doesn't mean that my life is of any different value than yours. So let's get after it. That's a beautiful way of like summing that up. And I like how you talked about too of like the process of leadership. One of the key pillars of that is building relationships. And I've definitely learned through crucible events, you build way stronger relationships that stand the test of time versus just like a normal 9 to 5 job. What about you? Same?
Oh, absolutely. We talk about it all the time with our Reuniting the Brave program. It's the people that you've gone through the most challenging times with that you're
Yeah.
going to have the closest relationship with. And we tend to talk about the good times, but I think about it all the time when I get together with you know Marines that I served with over different periods. And, what are the things you talk about and laugh about the most are at the time, the suckiest times.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember
100%.
being stuck out there in 102 degrees and the winds were blowing, blew over the shower tents. We didn't shower for 26 days. Those are the kind of moments that you look back at and you laugh with, but you both went through that shared misery,
Yeah.
or that shared trial, the tough times, where you've lost people. But those are the ones that I think bring you together and really make a tight bond that is inseparable. And that's, um, I look at the strongest friendships that I have and relationships I have, and they're with people that I went through the toughest times in my life with.
Yeah, it's what's so funny or ironic about that is that it's usually humor that we find in like those really terrible moments that kind of get us through it. I remember some of my worst memories, and some of the best friends that I have now is that we would just be laughing hysterically when a normal person was like kind of going through that environment. They're like, "You guys are absolutely crazy." Well, I think to be a one percenter like you just talked about, you have to be mentally on the edge. I guess I'll just say that. Like you have to be willing to like put yourself in very uncomfortable situations and find humor in it.
I agree with that.
So kind of balancing or kind of continuing down, when did you, because I know this is a deep passion of yours, when did you start developing a love for mentoring and coaching? Was that in the Marine Corps or when you started to make a transition?
It's funny you asked that because it was a topic that came up recently. Good friend Mick Hunt talks about your why
Mm,
and then your because. And it made me think, just literally, we were out on a hike a couple of weeks ago with my wife, and you know, why do I have that desire for mentorship? And I think it really goes back to the lack of what I had in my own life as a youngster.
mm,
Parents divorced, and there really wasn't that support or that mentorship. And I think back, I was fortunate that I had a few really strong mentors. One of my drill instructors who I worked very closely with him, even as a recruit, as he was moving up and taking over a new platoon. He was a sergeant of the guard in Beirut when the barracks
oh
was
wow.
bombed there. And we had just developed a very tight bond. And he was really my first mentor in the Marine Corps that I had, and was very,
Mm,
very strong mentor in that way. So it just, that has been my because, really, is giving back and providing that, whether it was as a teacher, as a coach, as a leader of young Marines, is I can be there for you. Somebody who truly cares, wants to know who you are, wants to know what your goals, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you achieve, what it is
mm,
that you want to achieve. And even taking some folks that were discarded by others.
yep,
I can think vividly of a couple people. They would always, being in the logistics shop, I would get the folks who got in trouble somewhere else, and they'd make
yep,
them the barracks manager, so they'd fall underneath me. And it's like, all right, you made mistakes. So here's the situation you're in. What are we going to do about that? How are you going to move forward? What is it that you want to achieve from this? You can do nothing and you can spiral downward, or you can take this as an opportunity to
yeah,
do the best job possible and move yourself forward, and get, it doesn't mean that you can't regain that. You're going to have to work harder for it, but being there and giving them the confidence, that somebody believes in them, I think, is such a huge factor. I saw it
mm,
over and over again, as with young Marines, with the different backgrounds they're coming into the Marine Corps with, to students especially. My gosh, the kids that are coming into school today with the baggage that they carry.
oh yeah,
Um, there's a great book out there on the Vietnam War, The Things They Carried. It's one of the best books I've ever read on war, because it talks about the things you carry, both physically, what do you have in your pack, and mentally, what mental pieces are you coming into the battle with. And I
mm,
really related that a lot of times to my students, like, what mental baggage are you carrying in, and what do you bring in that backpack? Do you have lunch in there? Do you have, something that you're holding on to dearly because you don't have any place for it, because you don't have a home?
yeah.
And I think those things carry over from our childhood into our service, and even onto the athletic fields and beyond. So having somebody that's there to mentor, I was fortunate to have a few people that really changed my trajectory in life, and that's really been my passion for giving that back in return.
Well, one thing I've always been curious in, like with people that have a high level of, I guess, emotional intelligence, especially to be a mentor and a coach. Um, what you just said too, like resonates deeply with me. And I'll share just a quick story, and then I'll shut up and kick it back over to you.
Uh,
But I remember being in Afghanistan. The platoon I took over had around 24 people at the time. They deployed with 44. They had a minimal man platoon to where we couldn't even drive some of our vehicles that we had. So it was a striker battalion that I first went to. So they did a call out to our company of like, hey, we're looking for people to come to this platoon. That yeah, it's a hard area, it's a hard problem set, but we need people. Hardly anyone volunteered other than what the quote unquote leadership challenges were within the company. And I'm not going to say names, but every single one of those men have my deep respect because one, they volunteered to come to a place of hardship. And then two, they were some of the best soldiers that I've ever seen in my life. And exactly what you did. And it's funny how we shared that is that I was like, hey guys, like you have a clean slate with me. I'm all about deeds, not words. And I don't look at your past. I don't care what you've done in your past, as long as it doesn't violate one of my ethical boundaries, right? And you wouldn't be here if that were the case. You have a clean slate with me. All I ask is that you give 100% a day because that's all we can do, and then look after your brothers to your left and your right. And they were the best soldiers I've ever had, and I've carried that mindset. Sometimes it burns you, and I'll be honest, like it's burnt me a couple of times, but 99% of the time it doesn't. And I always give people the benefit of the doubt until I've learned to not trust them. But with you, how did you what tools did you use to connect with people from like such a broad spectrum? Because I know the Marine Corps is like that too. You have inner city, you have people from the foothills of Appalachia. How did you learn to connect with them to become like a coach or a mentor?
Well, I think it goes back to the listen to learn and understand.
Mm,
Um, you know, I say I taught in one of the most diverse rural communities in the United States. We were in the Poconos in Pennsylvania.
yeah.
You know, when I got stationed there on recruiting duty in 1991, there was a population of 64,000.
Wow.
Um, 10 years later was a population of 185,000.
Mm,
So you had, your farmers, the Pennsylvania Dutch farmers in the West End that didn't like outsiders. You had your townies, you had folks that
yeah.
lived up in the hills and just wanted to be left alone. And
Yeah.
then you took, big city New York and plopped that down over top of all of it with, you know, different races, different ethnicities, different languages. I was a president of our school board for a while, and I remember one of the statistics was the vast amount of different languages that were spoken at home in our,
Mm,
and that was just one segment of the county. There's, 4 different school districts. I was like, wow, what diverse populations. So, to really comprehend, like you were saying, if you're coming from the coal mining regions, which I recruited in coal mining regions in
oh yeah.
Pennsylvania, and somebody says, hey, would you come out to my house? Sure. Where do you live? Well, we live at patch number 5. What's patch number 5? Just 5 little houses, a couple houses around one of the mine shafts. That was a patch. So to learn, and one, I think it's important to take the time and energy and effort to want to learn about them, learn
Yeah.
about where they came from, learn about their cultures. When you do, wow, what a vast experience. I mean, think of your travels. How much more do you learn just from traveling and meeting different people? And when you bring all of that together in one spot, that's a huge, huge piece. Understanding why they believe the way they believe, what
Yeah.
makes them tick. And when it comes down to it, what you really find is that you have a whole lot more in common than you do
Hmm.
apart. I watched some of the struggles that we had with 2 of my platoon mates in boot camp that came from very different backgrounds and very different upbringings, and it led to them, getting into a little bit of a scuffle while we were out at the rifle range. Unfortunately, it was right before the series commander came walking by and had us all out in our skivvies doing the digging in the sand pits. But by the end, they were bunkmates and best friends. Because they got to know each other and got to learn. So I think if you take the time to really learn and get to know your people and
Mm,
appreciate the difference in cultures, it provides, one, they know you care, and if you're going
yeah.
to mentor them, they've got to believe that you care, not just saying it. Words are one thing.
Yeah.
Like you said, deeds are a whole different component, and being there when it's important. um, and in today's technology age, I think probably the most important part of that is, are you present?
Mm,
How often do you see? I see it all the time where, well, I'm so busy as a leader, I don't have time. I'm going to type on here and talk to you over here where you're
Yeah.
not really paying attention. That person doesn't feel like you care. Like, all right, I'm
Yeah.
an afterthought. Take the time when you're with someone to be present in the moment, and really give them your undivided attention and make them feel like they're the most important person in the world to you right now.
Yep.
If you do that, wow. I mean, I have a couple of friends that my wife and I talk about all the time. Like, wow, they make you feel so special every time you're around them because you are the most important thing to them at that time. So when you
Mm.
can do that for other people, it just opens up a whole new world of people that are willing to listen and learn and allow you to be a mentor. They've got to
Yeah.
let you in, and if you're going to be effective, they've got to let you in, and that's being present.
You have to build trust, and I think trust comes through mutual respect and then time. Those are the two variables. And one of the most powerful lessons that I learned was actually from when I made the transition from the infantry to acquisitions. One of my bosses, Colonel Frazier, never forget this man. He was an aviator. It was a height of COVID. But he kind of like embraced me because I was the only weirdo coming into this like 4 star or story building, but he had a separate table in his office. And at that table was 2 chairs, some mints or whatever. And no one ever sat on that. And I was always curious, like, hey, sir, like, what's with this table? And he's like, well, when I have one-on-ones, and that's where we did our initial counseling, that's for a one-on-one discussion. If someone needs to come talk to me, there's no electronics allowed there. There's no distractions allowed there. It's just me and the other person, and we're going to have a candid conversation. And that's always stuck with me. And I've done that in the past, but I didn't realize I was doing that. I've always tried to be intensely focused with someone when they're talking to me and listen from an unselfish lens, if that makes sense. Is like I'm not looking for things that I can use to benefit myself. I'm looking for things from an empathetic point of view of like, hey, what are you struggling with? How can I help you? And then how can we continue to move forward together collectively? So that's awesome. And I love that. And it's a theme too that I've noticed with you, throughout your Marine Corps, what you talked about at the beginning of the episode till now, the connecting with people and just being authentic and caring, I think is the most important.
Yeah, I mean, think about when you walk into a room, and people are talking, and you come upon somebody, oh, you know them, and they start talking to you, but the whole time they're talking to you, they're scanning to see if there's somebody, that might further them to talk to
A
better.
100%. Yeah.
And even if you're thinking that, at least don't portray that. Give that person that's in front of you the time. Um, you'll gain so much more from it yourself, but you'll also make them feel important. But you see that all the time, and that's a shame.
I wish you would have told me that before I went to Soft Week 2 weeks ago, because I guarantee you half the conversations I was trying to find ways out, not because I didn't want to have the conversation. Is like I just needed a break. So I was looking at that for the exit sign. So I'm sure that probably wasn't well received.
And look, when you're in a situation like that too, there is overload at some point,
Yeah,
and that can be challenging. But it's take the time and give them that 5 minutes of undivided attention, and then it's okay to say, hey, look, I appreciate having the time, but I do have to excuse myself. There's ways of
yeah.
doing it that still meet the intent.
I love that. So transitioning first time right out of the Marine Corps. I know you went into the reserves and you pursued your passion for education. Can you kind of walk me through that experience? Because that didn't happen. What I know about you is it didn't happen probably as most people's educational careers go. You had a journey.
A little bit. I say it's the path you take. Sometimes you have no idea it's coming. So that's what I. Our youngest just graduated college. Between my wife and I, we have six, and the youngest just graduated. Like, look, you do not have to have it all figured out at 22 years old.
Yep.
Um, we changed careers mid 50s. Completely changed our life in many different ways. Um, yeah, I had been married before, and my ex didn't care for the military too much, and we had three younger boys that were. Well, at the time I transitioned out, I had one younger son that had just been born, so I stayed home as a stay-at-home dad during the day, transitioned into the reserves, went back to school to get my teaching degree. I'd spent 8 years on recruiting duty. Part of the reason I wound up on recruiting duty so long is I was at the point of my end of my first recruiting tour. I had an opportunity to put in a warrant officer package or stay on recruiting. And as I said, my spouse at the time did not care about the military too much and was like, I'm not going
Yeah.
anywhere. So I love recruiting, so it wasn't a bad thing, but I stayed on recruiting duty and really um, working with the high school age students was seeing the fact that they needed somebody to mentor them. I can't tell you how
Yeah.
many times I'd have kids come in and like, well, what do your parents think? Well, my parents don't care what I do. And what's the root of that whole statement? Is my parents
Mm-hmm.
don't care. Doesn't mean their parents don't, but that is the perception that that young person has.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard that way too often. And kids that just lacked any thought of direction,
Yeah.
where they might go. And it didn't matter whether it was coming in the Marine Corps, having some direction of where they're going to head. It doesn't have to be the end of the road, but at least start down that path. Have some kind of journey that you're heading on and know that. So that kind of drove me when I was looking to transition. All right, well, this is something that I could do to continue working with those same youth. I can continue my Marine Corps career in the reserve component. Um, and I'd already started coaching. I'd coached some youth league sports while I was on recruiting duty. Connected with
Mm-hmm.
a couple of folks and allowed me to get started with some youth programs in football and baseball, which always loved coaching and working with the younger kids. So it just fit naturally. Went back to school at 32. Definitely a different. When you're sitting there and the kid behind you, yeah, this is my third time taking this course. You're taking a basic history course. Let me guess, mom's paying? Well, how'd you know? Because if you were paying, you wouldn't be taking it 3 times.
Yep.
Um,
100%.
just a different focus. Knew why I was there. Knew what I wanted to achieve from it. Probably was much better off going back at that age because once I went in the Marine Corps, I said I was never going to college. Never's a long time. So
Yeah.
I say never. I said I'd never run a marathon. Well, I did one of those. So it's really what you put your mind to. But that was my real focus in moving into education, was to continue what I had started in recruiting and working with the young people. And I figured it was a great way um, to continue having impact on our youth, but also maintain, my military career.
And that's a question I was thinking about asking too. Is what lessons did you pull upon from the Marine Corps time from that you've gained for the lens of leadership to applying that as a teacher and even as a coach? Were there similarities, things that were common between both that helped you?
Oh, absolutely. I say all the time that college was the means to the end. In order to become a teacher, you got to graduate college and pass your certification exams. Um, but that was about the extent of what I really took into the classroom. What I took into the classroom was what I learned in the Marine Corps, how to deal with
Mm,
young people. Um, you know, People are, oh, how are young people today compared? Young people today are no different than they were 50 years ago. They reflect society,
yeah,
but the way you treat them is the way you're going to get treated back. And it's not about just telling somebody what to do. I That's the last thing you want to be doing, is always telling somebody what to do, because if you're telling them what to do, they're just going to rebel.
yeah.
Um, you know, I would go out there when we were doing conditioning all summer long for football. I was out there conditioning with I coach freshman and high school football. Um, and it's like, nope. If I'm going to have you run sprints, I'm going to run them with you, and if I'm beating you, we're going to keep running. Um, so it builds that trust that, hey, you know bonding as a team is only strong as its weakest links.
Yeah.
And I think those are lessons that we learn in the military. How do we pull people together as a team? It's a little different when you're in boot camp, because you get that very controlled environment, but a lot of that same principle works well whether you're especially coaching a team, because you hopefully have set a vision and you all have that same vision of winning, whether it's a game, a championship. What does it take to get there? And
Mm.
teaching that that's done in the off season, not in the during the game. Um, Focusing on the little things, doing the little things right. If
Yep.
discipline, attention to detail, being able to evaluate film not for your highlight reel, but for what mistakes did I make and how do I improve that. It's easy to practice the things you're good at. I love Jordan Wooden. He just like, look, I'm going to teach and we're going to institute our game plan and make people respond to us. And if you do
Yeah.
those little things well and you practice those things that you're weakest at and make them stronger, by the end of the season, we're going to be unbeatable.
Yep.
And those are all, I think, very valuable leadership lessons from the military. How do you handle your classroom? Well, I'm not going to call somebody out in front of their fellow students. I'll pull them aside and have that conversation with them, and you know, holding people accountable. And when I say accountable, you have to be responsible for your actions. We talked about, hey, giving people that second chance.
Yeah.
Well, you can't really give somebody a second chance until they have taken responsibility for their previous action. And I've
Yep.
only ever had one or two that I couldn't get to see that. And they were typically the ones that, all right, well, then we're going to have to process you out because
Yeah.
you've given us no alternative. But as long as you take responsibility for your previous action, you paid the consequences. Now you get a clean start.
Yep.
And I think that's the same type of thing. It's hard for students, especially when you're getting them at the high school level, because so many have already gotten so many limiting beliefs. Well, I suck at math. I'm not good at this.
Oh yeah.
And to change that around, to undo 15 years worth of that, whether it's coming from parents, previous teachers, previous coaches, their own, negative speak, um, creating that trusted environment where they can fail and move forward. You know, come into school looking for knowledge. Don't come into school for a grade, because you can cheat and get a good grade. But when
Yeah.
the end of the day, if you come in and you focus on knowledge, the grades will follow and you will have so much more opportunity. And we said
Mm.
knowledge is power, and it's the power of choice. You know, the more knowledge you have, the more choices you have. Um, that's, it's just, how do we how do we impart that onto our young? When people complain about our youth today, I'm like, look in the mirror. You created that. They're
Yep.
products of their environment, and they need more positive role models. You know, if we want our military force to stay strong, that's up to, especially us veterans, it's up to
Yep.
us to, what did we get? Look, this was a huge piece of who I am today. I look at the leadership opportunities, the mentoring that I had there. Uh, my gosh, the opportunities that I had to experience life propelled me to where I am today, and is the foundation of everything that I do. So, you know, that is the same thing that it can offer our youth today. Now, if all everybody talks about is that, oh, all veterans are broken and they're crazy, and
Yeah.
no, that's not the case at all. Again, we're one percenters. You know, that we have already shown that we can thrive above the average person, and that is going to set you apart. And I think there's a lot of folks in business that see that, not as many as should.
Yeah.
But you take that raw person with that ability. What can't you mold them to do? You know,
Yeah.
I can teach you to do anything, but you got to come with that foundation. If you come with that foundation and willingness to learn, we can teach you anything that you need to know.
Yeah. That I echo that sentiment that I believe veterans, when they get out, are a bigger impact for America and the United States, the nation as a whole, versus when they served. Because when they served, like their awesomeness is contained into their sphere of influence. But when you get out, you can impact huge levels of people, especially in large companies. And arguably, that's where it's most important, because what you just said, people don't see those types of shared values, those principles, those characteristics implemented every day, because they live in, what society allows them to see in a way. In the military and the Marine Corps, there are distinct core values and beliefs that everyone share. the selfless service, honor, integrity, duty, things like that that we all have. And when you get out and you transition out, I will say that I will take a veteran over someone who just has a college degree any day of the week because they're coming with one of the biggest things is resilience. Uh, if one thing captured my entire military career, it would be resilience and adaptability. I was an infantry officer in Afghanistan, and they charged me with developing 5K worth of road and building these buildings. I was like, well, that's what engineers do. I close with and destroy the enemy. I go pew pew with my gun. Like it's like, no, we need you to go build these roads and build these homes. And I was like, all right, well, I'll find a way. And I've always had that mindset beyond that is like, hey, like the next job I'm going into, I have no idea what I'm going to do, but I'm going to go in there coachable, curious, and committed. The three C's. And if I take those things, I'll learn. And I apply that to anything in life. And so what you're doing at Robert Irvine Foundation, and then veterans, what they're doing across this nation is exactly what we need. And I love how you talked about a lot of the times people focus on goals, like just trying to get something short term, and then you fall into like a dopamine kick of where we're always chasing that next hit. And I had to learn about this too, is that I need to think inside out. Who do I want to become? What are the behaviors or characteristics that need to be implemented? And at the end of the day, uh, what are the outcomes? If I focus on the outcomes first, then I will never find joy and fulfillment in things because every day is something else that you have to do, but you have to find joy and fulfillment in becoming something bigger than yourself. So all that was 100% fire. Again, I think I'm on 4 pages of notes now. So keep going.
Yeah, and the goal piece is something that you know, everybody knows Stephen Covey and that whole
Yeah.
goal piece, but really one of the things that was, I think, a big change for me over the last 10 years even was, you know, I began reading. I read before, but a lot of leadership stuff in the Marine Corps and so forth. But it was not until I read a James Clear, Atomic
Oh, yeah.
Habits,
Yeah.
and changing the process.
Yep.
Because you have a goal, you achieve the goal. Okay, and so many people think, well, when I get there, I'm going to be happier. When I get, no, that doesn't create happiness. Being fulfilled creates the happiness, and you create that happiness on your own. But if you have the process down, you will not
Hmm.
only achieve the goal, you will exceed the goal and keep going, because the process is what allows you to grow and keep moving forward. And I changed it to where I changed my whole morning routine. I'm a habit stacker. I get up in
Yeah.
the morning, I drink my coffee, I read, I journal, lay out my day, I get my workout in, usually get a hike in the morning, clear the brain, sit down. Now I'm ready to go to work.
Hmm.
Um, but I say, used to read a book a year. Now I read a book every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And just the amount of knowledge, you factor in that, the people that are writing most of those books have 20 years, 30 years of experience. So if you're
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
compressing that 20 years of experience into 2 weeks, take that times, 26 weeks throughout the year. Are you going to retain everything? No, but you certainly retain a huge amount, and you start to see the overlap and how those things all tie together. And it's about continual learning, continual improvement, both personally and professionally. Leadership isn't something that, oh, I know it all. You'll never
Yeah.
know it all. There's always something to be learned. I love working with Robert. He's a phenomenal mentor. The leadership that he provides, and I see it everywhere we go, whether it's young entrepreneurs, veterans, our military chefs. He's constantly evolving his own leadership and how he deals with people. And I think seeing those different groups of leaders as you evolve yourself gives you something more to pull from. Are you going to be able to emulate exactly what somebody else does? No, and you shouldn't. Take what they're doing and see how that fits into your life and your personality. What can I
Mm.
take from that will enhance what I'm doing?
Yeah.
And it's a continual process. And sometimes you circle back on something because you hear it, like, oh, okay, yeah, that's something I haven't really been implementing in my life recently, but I need to get back to that, because there's always, I always say there's always 40 hours of work to be had.
Yep.
That's never an issue. But how do I focus on my priorities, both personally and professionally, that are going to have those largest outcomes and take us to where we want to go. Focus on those priorities, whether it's the 80-20 rule,
Yeah.
um, or eating your frog, whatever, however you want to look at that particular piece, but focus on those things that are going to have the biggest outcomes. And, you know, that, I think if you do that, you'll continue to grow, you'll continue to learn, and continue to succeed.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with everything you said. And James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, was instrumental in me kind of developing that mindset. And thank God for Audible because I just don't have the time to read. So, like the car rides and stuff, sitting in the saunas in the morning, like if it wasn't for Audible, I would be on struggle bus. But because of Audible, 100%, I'm with you. I find myself getting into two or three books at a time and then like getting lost in a book and then oh, I forgot about this book. And then I try to do at least two a week. Just having a podcast too. If you were to write a book, I would 100% read your book before you come on the show. And then that's a challenge too, to consume that much information at a time. And I think that's a beautiful transition to where you're at actively right now in your leadership journey. So yeah, through the Marine Corps, we're a teacher, a mentor, coach, and then now transitioning into what you're doing within the Robert Irvine Foundation. How did you land on working within that nonprofit?
Well, my wife and I had both done nonprofit work for 25 years. I'd been with
That's
Simplifying
awesome.
America's Fund, doing fundraising for them, helped set up their community athlete program. Um, you know, I was the board chair for our local Northeast PA and Northwest New Jersey Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. My wife was board chair for our local YMCA,
Oh wow.
and we had done numerous other fundraising activities, and community leadership, school boards, zoning boards, and things of that nature. So we actually, they were in the process of doing an $18 million renovation while my wife was the board chair of our local Y, and that had failed a few times before. Was they tried it, she said, look, they don't have the capacity for any grant writers, so why don't we take a course, because if your wife's the board chair, you're the assistant board chair. And so took a grant writing course, and through the process, we took one that was just antiquated, and I said we came across our millennial connection, younger folks that had a new approach to it, and we actually developed a really good relationship with the two of them, with our years of experience on the nonprofit side as fundraisers and as board leaders, and taking what they knew as far as the grant writing perspective. And so we started a little side business while I was teaching. My wife's a chiropractor, doing grant writing, and found we did a lot more consulting, especially for younger, mostly military nonprofits. Helped out a few friends as well, but you know, we used to say you got to get grant ready before you can start to do grants, building that foundation. So
Yeah.
we did a lot of consulting work, building organizations, building their foundations, and getting them to where they needed to be, whether it was getting their IRS, um, 501c3 designation, had to fix a lot of their articles of incorporation at times. So, did a lot of homework, and gained a lot of knowledge in that regard. Um, and that led to my wife then becoming the grants and corporate relations manager for the Armed Services YMCA, serving young military families. And about 2 months later, we met Robert at an event, a fundraising event in the Lansdale, PA, and they were just starting this Reuniting the Brave program.
Yeah.
Um, Great, fabulous program. One of my favorite things that we do. And he's like, well, we'd really never done any grants in the past. It had been, when he started a program, the foundation had been a pass through, but he really wanted to focus on, physical, mental,
Yeah.
nutritional wellness of our active forces and our veteran community and their families and our first responders as well, anybody that serves. It's like, so before you leave here, make sure you talk to Judy, our president, Judith Otter. And one thing led to another, and so I came on board to help with the grant writing and foundation, you know, relationships, and that has since then led to other parts of what I do with the foundation. We got connected with the Face to Fight Coalition, which
Mm.
USAA, Reach Resilience, and Humana funded, but it's now 258 partner veteran service organizations that are
Oh wow.
dealing with veteran suicide.
Yeah.
And we were fortunate to be one to get a grant to incorporate evidence-based strategies. We do crisis response planning, safety planning, lethal means safety strategies. It's self-management tools for our veteran community. And actually, we've worked with a lot of active duty folks too and their families to create this self-management tool so that if you get into a crisis, you have the means to deal with that and, you know, do something different than what has been done to bring down the suicide numbers. So we're
Mm,
incorporating that into all of our programs. So I have the opportunity to kind of spearhead that and lead that initiative within the foundation. Um, but Robert's a very persuasive individual, and I
I've watched him on TV. I'm sure he is, and I've had a conversation with him. So in
he
person, is probably very persuasive.
he is, you know, and you talk about that leadership and the person who does what they expect you to do. There's nobody
Yeah,
that is giving back more to the veteran and active duty
I agree.
community than Robert. He is on
Yeah,
the road so many days out of the year, and whether it was just a DAV Patriot Boot Camp
yeah,
mentoring young military entrepreneurs. He'll every time he travels to a base, they work with military chefs and are working on revamping our entire food, the
this
way
is
we feed
awesome.
our troops. You know, I was just at a wellness seminar not too long ago, and looking at the obesity rates. Well, what are we going to do to change that? And he's working hard to
Mm,
make sure that we're, you know, giving our troops the nutrition they need.
yeah,
How can you go out there and do your job on the battlefield if you're not fueled appropriately? Um,
100%.
and so everything that he does and leads from the front makes it, you got to keep pace. So you
Yeah,
can't let Robert be out there by himself. So that's kind of the I don't know. It definitely is a motivator for me is when you work with somebody like that that has that passion and shares your passion for giving back and taking care of our military community and our families. It's it's a passion. It's not necessarily work. Um,
I agree 100%. I think people like that who have the passion and the purpose, like both align. I call it head, heart, hand alignment. If they could see it, if they have that intrinsic motivation, they just feel that it's so much easier to do the work to get your hands around something. And someone like that is just very charismatic. They're infectious in a way to be around. Like great leaders I've seen within the military or in the civilian world too. People seek them out to work with them because they're so passionate, they're so charismatic, they're so inspiring in a way that it's just easy to do work and achieve great things because it's just normal. And I love how the Robert Irvine Foundation focuses on like multiple different pillars too. Because like with me, I think that there's different pillars or buckets that we all have to be complete and to be the best individual that you can be. There's different levels, right? Balance, I think, is impossible, but finding harmony in those. So I wrote these down of covering food, wellness, financial support. It's really like a holistic approach to, I think, the root cause preventing suicide. And you and I share that passion. I think with me, because we all have shared experiences, right? And there's too many names to kind of go down. But with me, I'm trying to tackle it from showing other people there's a different way to lead. You can be a purposeful, accountable leader. You can be transformational. You can be inspiring, and your actions will have deep impacts across others. But we all are trying to crack the same nut, and at the end of the day, to just lower the number of soldiers who actually do take their life. And there's something you hinted at there, and I wondered if you could get deeper into that: suicide protection versus prevention. What are the distinguishing between those?
yeah, it's a great question. It was something you know, until about a year ago, I really wasn't clear on it myself.
Yeah,
When you look at most of what our veteran organizations do, we provide protections,
yeah,
um, end isolation, give people a purpose, reconnect them. Just isolation is there's so many different causes, but they're not always visible.
yeah,
Um, you know, so things like our Reuniting the Brave, where we bring units back together that serve together. We bring the families in, we bring the Gold Star families in, we bring the families of the fallen in. Um, you know, reconnecting them. We talked earlier, who do you have your closest connection with? Those who you went through the most trying times with. So when
Yep.
you can reconnect those folks, wow, what a difference it makes. Literally, it saves lives. We've had, you
Hmm.
know, feedback from some of our attendees that, the one that sticks out to me is, we had a gathering of 500 Coast Guard rescue swimmers in Gulf Shores last June, and one of the swimmers came with the intention of saying goodbye.
Oh
Got
wow.
there, his wife had no idea that he was struggling. Got there, got talking to his fellow swimmers, and that's a very tight knit community. There's only
Oh yeah.
1,185 of them since 1985, and just to listen to others talk, and the fact that, hey, the other people are struggling with the same things that I'm struggling with, and that it's okay. You know,
Mm.
it's okay to have those struggles, but what do we need to do to go forward and move forward? The fact that he's now connected with those folks again, and he's thriving, not that he doesn't still have some struggles, but they stay connected.
That's awesome.
And even for the spouses, having that opportunity that where they can reconnect. Some of them, I would say, the new spouses that are out there because they weren't with their service member when they were serving, they
Yeah.
get to now have a resource with other spouses that they can talk to, about similar situations, and recognizing that, hey, what my spouse has gone through is not unique. There's others, and there's resources out there to help us. So it's really important to have those types of protections in place. Whether it's equine therapy, dog therapy. Some of the service dogs what they can do is incredible, from detecting
Agree.
heart rate to
Yeah.
diabetes to stress. Um, it's incredible. So what works for one might not work as well for the other. Um, you know, we know that the medication isn't necessarily the best option. So
Yeah.
how do we do things that are, you know prevention? So doing a Columbia screening, it's a simple 6 questions. You might ask question one, and depending on how they answer that, skip to question number 6.
Yeah.
You know, Organizations like Vet for Warriors, that people call in, they screen every single veteran that calls in there now. And just through the screening, people talk because the question is asked, and
Mm.
that's important. When we do crisis response planning, or we do safety planning, I like to think of it as a safety plan regardless, because you know it's for the bad day, whenever you're going to have
Yeah.
a bad day, and nobody knows when that's going to be. And we've all lost people, and we've all had our own struggles at different times. Maybe
Yep.
not to that extent, but we've had those bad days, and where you start to spiral, and recognizing what those signs are in yourself. And it's simple as putting it on a 3x5 card. What are those things that I'm struggling with? What sends me into that spiral?
Yeah.
Then what kind of things can we do to is it hit a punching bag? Is it go out for a walk with a dog? Is it listen to heavy metal music? Whatever it is that helps us calm down and brings us down from that, great.
Mm.
Who's that trusted person that we can call? The person that's not going to be judgmental, and that's the key. You can't be judgmental when somebody's reaching
Yep.
out to you. Again, go back, listen to learn and understand. That's important. Um, Being able to know your reasons for living, and then in the end is having a you know 911, 988, Vets for Warriors. Who can I call in that
Yep.
last ditch effort? And that's an intervention or prevention strategy, because it's a self-management tool that you can put on a 3x5 card. You can put a safety plan on your phone. That can go with you anywhere.
Yeah.
Lethal means safety. What's the reason? One of the major reasons veteran suicide is so much higher. We tend to use weapons, and we have
Yeah.
access to weapons. So what can you do to reduce access? Use a cable lock, use a gun box. you know Overwatch project uses magnets. I could say, Josh, hey, would you put your phone number on here for me, so I know I'm responsible for calling you before I open that gun box, and
Mm.
do the same for each other. It's that extra step, because we're talking about a 5-minute window. We got to get you through
Yep.
that crisis to get you back down to you know to make it to the next day. And
Yeah.
those are prevention strategies.
Mm.
you know three, and there's some others, but those are, three major prevention strategies. The protections are, how do we end the isolation? How do we get you purpose again? Reconnecting with those resources that you may need. But really, I think some of that is the personal connection. And
Yeah.
I think Buddy Check Week is kind of going in that direction, that direction of that protection. But it's more than just, hey, how you doing? And you never really wait for the response.
Yeah.
It, really having the conversation, like, how are things going, Josh? Are things, how's work? How's the family? Having that little bit more detailed contact with those that are closest to us. Um, I talked about a reuniting brave. The one thing that always I looked at was, all right, well, who's not here? And they would give me a couple of people. I was like, let's reach out to them while we're here,
Mm.
so that they're coming together. Next time you guys get together, they're part of it. So reach out, have a conversation with them, because if they're not here, they're the ones I worry about. They're not
Yep.
reconnecting with that number one resource that they have, which is the people they served with. So, you know, how do we create those protective environments? Um, and I always say, to really move forward, when you're talking about suicide, we're all vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And when you look at vulnerability, Brene Brown did this in a presentation she did with some special forces units.
I
She
love
went
her
in and,
books, by the way.
oh, she's fabulous. She talked about being, working with Army Special Forces. And she got there and she said, "I'm nervous." She says, "They're looking at me, I'm sure, like, what the heck is she going to offer us today?"
Yeah.
Um, and it's like, look, I just ask you one question and then we'll go forward from there. So, how many of you have ever been in a vulnerable situation that required bravery? And it was dead
Mm.
silent. And she said, it felt like forever. It probably was only like 30 seconds, but it felt like it was 10 minutes. She said, finally, somebody said, "All right, let's get started." And you think about that. I don't care whether you're a first responder, you're running into a burning building when everybody's running out, you're going into a live shooter situation when everybody else is scattering, or
Yep.
you're, getting ready to cross that line of demarcation into a combat environment. You're vulnerable and it requires bravery. But when I think about, we talked about it earlier, when you're stepping forward, it's that bravery and it's thinking about the person to your right and your left.
Yep.
That whole patriotism thing sounds great, but in that moment, it's not about patriotism. It's about making sure you're protecting each other's lives so that you can get home to your loved ones.
Yep.
And that brave space to where you have that person on your right and left is, I think, what we need to create more of
Yep.
in our veteran and our active duty community, because the active duty community is dealing with a lot of suicides as well, and
Yep.
society is as a whole. But how do we create that brave space and we provide that left and right flank for each other, and truly be there and be concerned, and take the time. I've been working on reaching out to at least one friend every day, whether it's a
Mm.
text, just to
I gotta get
reconnect.
better at that. That's a good idea.
I'm certainly not a perfect habit yet, but
Yeah.
it's something that I think about and I work on every day, whether it's quick message, quick text, um, and that, I think, if we all did that and we all took the time to be there and be present for each other, that's what's going to change the trajectory in our suicide in our community, is being there. And you know, the VA is not going to fix it. The government's not going to fix it. We need to fix it ourselves,
Yeah.
and provide um, that brave space for each other.
Yeah. If it's to be, it's up to thee, right? Like I as you were talking, it's funny, my mind was thinking through like a combat arms mission planning scenario. So we all have like a decisive point, like within a battle of where you either win or lose. And suicide prevention, that 5 minutes where you just talked about, like that's the decisive point. So what do we have at our disposal for either offensive or defensive operations, right? That can help us overcome that decisive point. So we have the market advantage, not just then, but like moving forward. And like how you structured that and then what you're doing too is like super impactful. So I just take a moment to just say thank you for everything you're doing now.
It goes back to, we've all lost. Um, and that's an important thing. I don't know. I always say my why is when I was born with craniostenosis. So my soft spot on the top of my head grew shut too
Mm,
quick and put pressure. And I was fortunate to have been a surgeon in the army that, you know, did tons of operations in Korea. When I was born, my mom took me to her neurosurgeon. She said, look, I would do 6 surgeries and there's no guarantees, but this take him to see Dr. Linus. He's been doing this new procedure and it's once and done. And I was fortunate. I have a scar, I got a little bit funky shaped head, but I survived that. And because of having that new procedure, it gave me the opportunity to not just live, but to thrive. And how can I
yeah,
help others do that? You know, Service is the number one way you can do that, giving back. Um, and we're all very fortunate to have what we have. So how can we help others and give back? I always say you get back 10 times what you give. And talk about that personal fulfillment, seeing our veterans and their families thrive. There's nothing better than that ability. And I love working with the foundation because I get to see that on a regular basis.
mm,
Whether it's providing an iBot for somebody, giving them the independence and the confidence back, seeing the service dogs and what they mean for a family, getting people back together, and just giving people a voice to talk in that space to talk about their struggles. And
yeah.
hey, we're here to work forward together, because we can do this together.
Yeah, no, 100%, brother. So quickly, how can people find the Robert Irvine Foundation, either if they need a resource or if they want to get involved in some capacity?
Sure, it's robertirvinefoundation.org. Um, we're in the process. We're going to have a new website coming out that's going to be a lot more interactive and give opportunities for people
Awesome.
to engage even that much more. Obviously, we're across all the social medias as well, but you know, we always say if people are interested, I always throw out my email. It's ryarnall at robertirvinefoundation.org. If people want us to come and work with our organization, we are always happy to partner, and especially when it comes to the suicide prevention and teaching more people the importance and the tools that are out there and available, to prevent that, and just to reconnect people too, and help each other thrive. And there's so many of our peer organizations out there doing such great work. So
Yeah, Robert, this has been a phenomenal episode. A little bit longer than an hour. I could keep going, but I definitely want to be respectful of your time. And I've learned so much from you. I think I have now 5 pages of notes, and most importantly, feel inspired. That's a mark of a great episode with me. Is if I have a guest on that I call purposeful, accountable leader like yourself, and I leave here to be inspired to continue to take action. So thank you for everything that you're doing. Humbled to get to know you at a little bit deeper of a level, and just keep getting after it. Thank you.
I appreciate it, Josh. Thanks for your leadership, and appreciate the time.
Yeah. Have a great day, brother.